And we are off and running. Dr. Stan Beecham, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Paul. Good to be back.
Mate,
Appreciate you having me back.
You're looking very fit and healthy, I've got to say.
Well, I'm trying. I'm trying to keep it in one big piece. You know, when you're 61, you got to put a little more effort than when you're 21. And but I figure if I'm going to be alive, I might as well try to be the best version of myself.
It's a really good mindset actually to have, and it plays in beautifully. But I was just remarking the other day to my wife, we're both in our 50s now, and I said to her, this is probably the last decade of us being able to build muscle and strength, because after that it's a decline, and depending on what you do dictates the speed of the decline, right? Now I guess it is probably still, you are still capable physiologically of building muscle and fitness when you get into your 60s, depending on what you're being. Hold on. For fuck's sake,
we lose it.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Oh yeah, I just lost it. We're gonna have to start that again. For some reason, my computer jumped out of my headphones and then back into it. Right, so we'll start that again. Dr. Stan Beecham, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be back.
Mate, I've got to say you are looking pretty good.
Well, I'm trying to keep it together. I'm 61 today. Today's actually my birthday, and you know, the thing about the older you get, the harder you have to work. You know, when you're a kid, when you're in your 20s, all you have to do is get out of bed and everything works just fine.
That's
and
right.
Now, you know, my warranty has run out.
I love that expression.
So now I'm driving this rig around every day without a warranty on it. So you know,
so you gotta be careful, right? I was saying that to my wife. We're both in our 50s, and we were talking about it does get harder. And I said to her, we're probably in the last decade of being able to build muscle and fitness, but that's all dependent on your base, right? So we're quite fit and healthy. So for us, I think this decade's really critical because we want to build a buffer of fitness and strength, because it gets downhill from there. Now, the reality is for most people, it goes downhill from their 30s, right? We lose muscle mass at the rate of between 3 and 8%, and your fitness drops off. So that's per decade, and your cardiovascular fitness can drop off at like 1% a year. So you do have to work a shitload harder as you get older, right? And I remember, mate, it reminds me of a conversation I had with a lady called Margie Smith, who's a molecular geneticist, and she said, Paul, we all have this pact with our genes, and it's basically our genes say we're going to keep you alive and keep you in good shape, but we forget to read the small print, and the small print says until you pass optimal childbearing age, and then all bets are off. Your genes are they're only interested in survival of the species, and once you pass childbearing age, they don't give a shit, right? So you got to work hard.
Yeah, that's right. But you know, I'm at the point now where it's not so much that I want to work out, it's that I want to avoid how I feel if I don't work out. You follow me?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't mind working out, don't get me wrong, but if I don't work out, I feel really bad.
Yeah.
I just don't feel good in my body. I don't feel like I'm doing my part, you know, to keep this thing going. And so, you know, I'm motivated on both sides to do it. But, you know, the secret is to do things that you enjoy doing. Like, you don't have to be miserable.
That's right. That's right.
There's
and lots
plenty
of
things to do where you're moving around and it's enjoyable. I've been going over to Europe and taking these long pilgrimages routes, and I went.
How are you doing the Camino?
Yeah, the Camino, and I've walked all the Camino in Spain. So this year, my girlfriend and I, we went and walked in France. We walked for 30 days, did 450 miles.
Wow.
And on the third day, I was actually walking by myself some, and I met this guy. He's 83 years old, And he and I did 35 kilometers together.
Jumping, Jesus.
And this guy's 83. And he was like, the last, you know, when you go that far, I mean, the last 5 or 6 kilometers, you're ready to be done. And
Yeah,
this old guy,
absolutely.
man, he was just stride for, and it really made me feel good because I'm thinking, at the time I was 60 and he was 83. And I thought, I got another good 20 years if I take care of myself.
Yeah.
But I
And
see
did you?
that all the time on the Camino. I see people in their 70s and 80s, averaging 25 kilometers a day for a month, no problem.
And did that guy give you a little bit of inspiration?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, when you see
Uh,
someone do that, it shows you that it's possible, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This guy's not an athlete. He just, he gets up and walks and he trained. I mean, he trained for the hike, but he, gets out and walks every day.
That's really interesting. It's going to lead into what I want to talk to you about today because me and Oscar, when we lived in our old house, we're still in the same village, and we would go for a run most mornings, and we'd see this old guy. He's got to be in his 90s, right? If late 80s, but he really looked like he's in his 90s, and he'd run up the hill every day, and he would be slow, but he would do it every day, and he's a real inspiration to Oscar. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember once I said to Oscar when we were in our new house, he likes to go for a run in the morning. I said, "Mate, it's okay. You can have a day off. It doesn't matter." And he said, "Dad, do you think that old man that we used to see had a day off?" He says, "That's why he's in great shape." So he said, "I'm going." Right. So that inspired a little 12-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is pretty cool.
it
And
is.
that leads in to what I want to talk about today, because I've been thinking a lot about this whole idea of self identity and self esteem, and the roots of it, and basically how our experience shapes our reality and shapes our identity. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
I'll have some input on this from a neuroscience perspective. You'll have probably a shitload more from a psychologist perspective. But let's talk about the big things that shape our brain slash mind slash consciousness slash identity slash self esteem, all of those things. Um, and how much of it, from your perspective, with your profession and the people that you meet, how much of all of this is driven by childhood experiences?
Well, I think the childhood experience is the foundation, that along with the genes that you were passed on, right?
Mm,
And so one of the things that I see repeatedly with my clients, because when I first start coaching an executive, I ask them about the environment that they grew up in, and
yeah,
so I know a good bit about their background. And what's interesting to me is how certain things play out over and over in a person's life.
yeah,
So, for an example, if you were, say, you were left by a parent or both parents at a young age, this sense of abandonment or I
yeah.
can't trust or count on people,
Mm,
I frequently see that showing up repeatedly throughout the person's life. Now, I'm
yeah.
aware I'm making a generalization here, Paul,
Mm,
but what I'm getting is when you have certain experiences as a child, um, going days without food, being in an environment where you're not safe, being in abandoned, being physically, sexually, emotionally abused. When you have experiences like that, it's easy for most of us to see, like, oh yeah, that would affect you later on down the road.
mm,
But it's not just those traumatic experiences. It's all experience that we have. So, for example,
yeah.
something as simple as most of us grew up in a family where the family had a belief or a code around money.
Mm-hmm,
Okay. And what I see is that most people's philosophy on money, which I think we carry with us, is you either grew up in an environment where there was a scarcity, there wasn't
mm-hmm,
enough,
yeah.
or there was an abundance, or somewhere in between. And I can't tell you how many wealthy people I know who grew up in an environment of scarcity,
Yeah.
right? So now they're millionaires, and their belief system and relationship with money is scarcity.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. And so they're
tends to
very,
endure.
the thing is that works for you from a saving standpoint. It makes it hard for you to have fun with money if you have a
Yeah.
scarcity model,
Yeah.
right? But you certainly don't get into debt like folks who may have a different, like an abundance model, right?
Mm.
Spend all my money because there's always more coming. But just those kinds of things, I mean, they permeate and change life. And obvious things like religious belief,
Yeah.
which most of us don't change, and influences decisions that we make and how we live our life. And what's interesting about people's beliefs, like if you just ask a person who's a religious person, like, in the US, I think 70% of Americans still identify as being a Christian.
Mm.
If you ask them why they're a Christian or why they believe in God, they'll have a real difficult time telling you.
Yeah.
Like,
Because I
they'll be
just
like, what do you mean why? I believe in God because there's God. That's why I believe. I believe it. I'm a Christian because, I mean, they'll give you an answer that is the one that was told them when they asked that question. Because when you're a child and you ask, why something so, the answer oftentimes is because that's just the way it is.
because it is.
But
Yes, that.
well, what I'm getting to is we have strongly held beliefs, most of us, that we really haven't dissected and tapped into. And what I'm suggesting is it's probably in your best interest. And I'm not saying change your belief.
Yeah.
You might. It would be a shame to go your whole adult life and have the same beliefs at 60 that you did at 6.
Yeah.
But what I find is that most people, if you start challenging them by asking them questions about what they believe, which is just a fancy way of saying what you hold is true,
Yeah.
some people will get quite defensive and angry at you. Or
Hmm.
even if you don't agree with them, they'll get upset.
That's really interesting, Stan, because um, this whole thing about the early life experiences, the Jesuits, right? So you live in the Bible Belt. I was brought up in Northern Ireland, which is quite religiously divisive, right?
Yeah,
But the Jesuits have a saying, give me a boy till the age of 7 and I'll give you back a man, right? And it's
right.
just the impact of early life experience on the brain. And we know from a neuroplasticity perspective that Jesuit statement is actually not a bad statement, because we're born with about 200 billion neurons and we've lost about 100 billion by the time we're 2 years old through synaptic pruning, right? So our brain is
Yeah.
born with all this potential, and then it's our experience that actually prunes our brain. And most people don't realize that most of your pruning happens in early life. And
Hmm.
then I think there's another great epigenetic period around puberty. Um, but that whole thing about questioning, and so I often say to people, you should be questioning the things that you hold the most dear, because
Yes,
they are generally the things that we have the
that's right.
strongest confirmation bias about, right?
Yes.
And
Put your own belief system on trial.
yeah, I love
Like,
that.
I was thinking about this the other day because I was listening to something, and the guy was making reference between the difference between knowing about something versus knowing something.
Mm,
And my sense is there's things that we know about, but we don't really know it.
yeah.
We haven't experienced it. We
Mm,
read it, we heard someone talk about it, but we don't know it. And I was really thinking about just that importance of, like, a lot of the work that I do is I actually try to create a different experience for folks so
yeah.
that they experience themselves differently, so that they have conversations that they've never had before. So now you know something versus you know about something. But most people who know about something, they present it as they know it.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting distinction, isn't it? I mean,
Hmm.
if we go back to the religion thing, I see when you were talking about religion, I remember being at mass with my mother, who converted from Protestantism to Catholicism which is very unusual. I'm from a mixed marriage in Northern Ireland, which was quite a rare thing. So we were
Mm-hmm.
brought up as Catholics. My dad didn't go to mass, but my mum actually was the one who went to mass, and I used to go with her on a Sunday morning. And I remember I would have been about maybe 12, 13. And I remember listening to the priest talking about a gospel, giving a sermon. Uh, and I remember just looking around to see if people were actually listening to him, because I thought he was talking horse shit about something, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I could see just everybody, sort of nodding and just taking in everything that he said without question. And then I started over the coming weeks really listening to the Gospels and started deciding that I didn't particularly like the Gospels. And then I remember on the back of that thinking, all of the stuff started to emerge about the Catholic priests abusing kids. And I sort of started rebelling against it. And over the preceding years, developed a view that the Catholic Church was a horrendous self-preservation society, right? I'm talking about the institution. I've always held that there are very good
But very
Catholics,
successful.
but it was the first ever multinational, right?
And they
Uh,
still are.
and they still are,
Well, they're
and
their own country. The Vatican City is its own
yeah, that's
sovereign
right.
state. The Pope is
Yeah,
the king.
yeah,
So
and
once you step inside of their walls, they can do whatever they want.
that's right. And I was actually
Legally.
there, and I was there in July actually, and it was really interesting. But the wealth in that place is disgusting, right? However, I'm getting to the point where sorry, the point is, I then started to question it. So I started to then start to explore other religions, which then brought me into philosophy, which I then went into a whole heap of different philosophies and stuff like that that massively enriched my life. So I'm saying that the point is that my life became much richer because of questioning those beliefs that were just
Mm-hmm.
indoctrinated into people, right, from
Yeah.
an early age.
So when we take something like belief, which has a huge impact on how we live our lives. You just talked about some of the biological aspects of that. There's actually some personality factors that I play into it,
Mm,
right? So there's psychologists who are personality theorists, and if you look at that research, the academic research, not the shit that's on the internet, but the real science of personality, you'll see that most of the people who are experts in the field agree that there are 5 distinct and separate personality traits.
so the big five you're going to talk about?
The big 5.
Right. And
So
can we go through these, Stan? Because I love the
yeah,
big five. And as you say, there's lots of people I deal in workplaces. There's lots of
right.
people do Myers-Briggs and DISC, and it's just
Yeah.
made up bullshit, right?
Well, it is. It's a parlor game. It's entertaining and it's interesting.
Yes.
But of the big 5, there's 2 that we should talk about when you look at it at this topic of belief and what we hold as true. One is agreeableness.
Yeah.
And so if you score high on agreeableness, you're going to have a lot of friends. You're going to be nice and kind because you agree with people. And what's interesting that you got to also understand about personality is when you look at the research, it doesn't change much.
Mm,
So
mm.
we tend to think of personality as like hair color, where we can change it. No, personality is like height and weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it's very difficult to change. And so agreeableness. So if I'm an agreeable person, then I'm much more gullible and susceptible to bring in what someone presents to me. And we
Yeah.
know that if you look at leadership, you actually want leaders to be slightly disagreeable. In other words, you want them to push back, or
Yeah.
someone, does a project and it's not done well, you need to say, hey, you got to do this again.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about agreeableness is their gender differences, where
Yeah.
women are more
Well,
agreeable than men.
and that plays a part. I'm not saying it's a huge part, but it certainly plays a part in the gender gap in terms of income levels, because
Absolutely. And
women
so,
are
but,
much more
but
agreeable and men will go,
yes,
I
but
want a pay rise.
right, but the part of that is being politicized. No one talks about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, but yeah, so if you were coaching a woman, or you have a daughter, you want to teach them how to disagree in an effective way, or push back, or say no. So agreeableness is one, and then
Openness.
open-mindedness
I
is
knew
the
you were going to
other.
say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about openness or open-mindedness is it's the personality trait that's most highly correlated with intelligence.
Mm, interesting.
And so there's this term called intellect, and intellect is actually a personality descriptor of intelligence.
Mm,
So if you say a person has intellect, what you're talking about is the way they talk, the way they present themselves, a sophisticated person. But we know open-mindedness is correlated with intelligence. So again, go back and think about belief. So if you're not willing to allow someone to challenge your beliefs, or
mm,
just to challenge your opinion on something, so you're low on open-mindedness. So which means you're less curious, and you're less likely to integrate, adapt, and learn. And then you look at guys like Einstein, where Einstein basically said it's about curiosity. It's not about
yeah.
intelligence, it's about curiosity. In
Yeah.
other words, it's about being open-minded. Well, open-minded people are willing to say, I don't know, or I don't have all the answers. So when you think about someone who has a belief that they hold on tightly to, and you'll see this in your life, there are people that you would give them evidence that the belief isn't true, and they won't change the belief in the face of
Mm,
evidence, which is
yeah.
interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly strong things such as political leanings and religious leanings,
Religion and
right?
politics are the two, especially in the US, that are getting a lot of attention now. And
Yeah.
you can see how, so for example, someone will vote for a politician because of the party he or she's in, even if they've done some pretty deplorable things.
Yeah. It's pretty shocking. Now, it's really interesting about that you're saying that the personality is hard to shift, right? And I've seen some of
It's
the literature
hardwired. Yeah.
totally agrees on that. Do you know one thing that will change your openness by a standard deviation, which is a huge amount?
Yeah.
Psychedelic experiences,
Yes.
right? And I was listening to Jordan Peterson with Terence McKenna's brother, who is a he's
Hang on.
an
Sorry.
Terence McKenna is one of the world leaders in psychedelics, and his
Yeah.
brother actually has a foundation, and they were actually discussing that psychedelic experience will shift openness, as in higher up the openness scale, by
Yeah.
one standard deviation, which is absolutely massive, right?
Well, they're having real success with psychedelics in the psychotherapeutic community.
Yep.
So people who have trauma,
Mm-hmm.
people with substance abuse, and what's interesting about this research is people are having single episodes, single dosage, and having a
Yeah,
shift. And they haven't legalized these drugs yet, but they're going to. They're
it's
going to
good
have to.
going.
But the psychopharmaceutical companies are going to raise holy hell about it,
Mm,
because imagine someone who's taking an antidepressant every day, or an anti-anxiety every day, and they go, and whether it's psilocybin or LSD or ayahuasca, and they do a single treatment, and then they're like, okay, I got it now.
mm.
um, and that
And
and that's what's happening, that's what's
it,
coming, that's the
it
good
is.
news.
Yes, and my experience with this happened more than 20 years ago in the Amazon jungle. Well,
But you did ayahuasca?
I've had numerous ayahuasca experience, and San Pedro. And my first experience was with this shaman, this female shaman, and we did it actually. It was in Peru, in Cusco, in some sacred ground for her because she's a
Right.
shaman. She was allowed onto that, and we did this San Pedro experience that just blew my mind. But the point was, there was a Belgian guy there who had been an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he'd been in and out of rehab and in and out of rehab, and he had come to see her, and he said 4 days with her was a bigger
Mhm.
impact on him than years and years and years of rehab, right? And that's where then got introduced to or discovered the ayahuasca church in Brazil that actually uses ayahuasca in its ceremonies and has a very this is 20 years ago, had a very high success rate in treating alcoholics and drug addicts, right?
Yeah.
And
Set
there's
and setting is
shamans who
really
special.
important. Yeah.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. When you're talking about psychedelics, the set and setting is everything, right?
Well, Paul, we were talking about the difference between knowing about versus knowing, and I'm a big proponent of knowing versus knowing about. That said, last year I went with a group of psychologists and doctors, and we did a 3-day psychedelic retreat.
Oh, wow.
And I did different things each of those 3 days, but I did ayahuasca, and it was crazy.
Mm.
And you really get some insight into yourself, because what I learned about ayahuasca is about surrender.
It is the amount of self insight that you get on ayahuasca. If people haven't done it, it's really hard to explain it, I think.
Well, if you think about normal psychotherapy, the problem with normal psychotherapy is you've got the person's ego, you got their defense mechanism,
Mm,
right? And so you're fighting through all this armor. Well, with the psychedelic, all that's peeled away.
yeah.
So the process is much faster. Plus, you, the subject, you are both the doctor and the patient,
Mm,
your own
and
mind. And
yeah.
and that, you like when I did ayahuasca, I was confronted by a group of guys that were dressed up like Darth Vader, you
Hmm.
know, who basically killed me and took me to the underworld, to the other side. But you understand at some level that it's just your own mind. It's not other people doing it to you. And if you think about a lot of the trauma that people have that they carry on and on and on,
Mm,
they'll tell you a story about what someone did to them 20 years ago, which is true,
yeah.
but they're perpetuating it themselves in current time, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And
By reliving it, replaying it, giving it importance, not understanding how to. And you'll see this with people where, two people will have a very similar traumatic experience. And one person will be able to integrate it into their life and go on, and another person, it totally wipes them out and they just
yeah.
can't function. And these kinds of medicines really help people get a handle on this stuff
Mm,
in short order.
yeah.
It's really a shame that these medicines are not legally available to people now, but I
Mm,
think they will be, just because the evidence, and they're doing research in,
yeah.
reputable places like Johns Hopkins in the US, and
Yes.
so it's just a matter of time. But when these things come forward, some people's lives are going to be radically changed.
And look, I have seen some of the research that's being done, and it is pretty mind blowing. So it is coming, and
Mhm.
particularly there's some interesting research being done on combat veterans, and me being
Yes.
ex-military,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's something that I'm particularly interested in, and
Sure.
guys with really serious PTSD on one experience, it just melting away, right? It is just pretty powerful. Now, we have to be very clear here, Stan, that this is not about just going out into the street and buying some
No.
LSD or magic mushrooms or
Right.
ayahuasca and getting into it.
No.
It's
No,
the
you
it's
don't
a
want to do that.
guided journey. It's a guided journey that is
Well, there
really,
are
really
professional
important.
people that take this serious, who have medical backgrounds, psychological backgrounds, and they're not playing around. They're
Mm.
trying to save people's lives. And those are the cats that you want to engage with. And, you know,
Absolutely. Now, until that point, right, we need to then just work on our own psychology, right? And for most people out there, it's like, so we talked about the impact of religion in shaping you. A couple of other things, parents and peers, right? You did mention
mhm,
about parents and abandonment. Um,
right.
uh, when my kids were younger, it almost scared the shit out of me, knowing from a neuroscience perspective the impact that parents have on the shaping of their brains. So, from your experience, and your background, how big an impact is that, and how big an impact are your peers on shaping your reality?
Well, the research that I'm a parent, so obviously it's huge. I would say that what the research suggests is that we as parents are the biggest influencers of our children's mindset, belief
Mm,
system, uh, until they go to school.
mm,
And then the research suggests that once your kid starts going to school, so 5, 6, then they're with their peer group more than you are, and now they're having a greater impact on them. But just that whole sense of like, are you smart or are you dumb? Are you pretty? Are you ugly? Are you
uh,
this? I mean, just pick one. You don't know.
mm,
And you're gonna, as a child, you're gonna believe, just say something as simple as, am I smart or dumb? Based upon what people tell you, you're gonna believe that. What
mm.
am I capable of doing? Oh, you're no good, you're worthless, you're not going to be good at anything. Like, I know people who were told that as children by their
Yeah,
parents.
and it's a
And I also know
crime, isn't
people
it?
that it's child abuse. But I mean, I also know people who were told you can do anything that you want. You have to do the work. Okay.
Mm,
But if you truly want to do something, there is a path to that place.
yeah, and
And
I
we
think
tell people both of these things.
the important thing that you just said is you have to do the work, right? Because there was a movement in psychology that came out of the States in the 1980s about this self-esteem and the boosterism of boosting people's self-esteem and telling them that they're awesome and they're beautiful and they can be anything they want to be, without the caveat of, and you got to work your ass off if you want to have a chance, right? So
Yeah.
where's the right line? So you're a parent, you're a psychologist. What is the right line to take if there's parents listening to this, about that whole idea of self-esteem, and actually to add a bit more depth to that question, how much of real self-esteem comes from what people tell you versus your achievements and how you interact with people?
It's the latter. So the mistake that most parents make is they say to their child, honey, you're special. Well, that child
Mm,
is special to you because you're the parent,
yeah.
but to the rest of the world, it's not. And so when you tell a child to say, for example, who can't read, and now you're the only child in the class who can't read, and you feel terrible. If you go and say that child, don't worry about it, it's okay, that doesn't work.
Mm,
You need to teach the child to read.
yeah.
I remember when we were raising our kids, there was a kid on the street who couldn't ride his bike, and all the other kids were riding his bike. And so I went to him and I said, "Do you want to learn to ride your bike?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'll teach you right now, and in 15 minutes you'll be riding the bike. But the first thing we have to do is take those goddamn training wheels off that your mother and father put on there, right?" So when they weren't looking, I took his training wheels off and I had him riding the bike. But the fact of the matter is, he was left out, and he knew he was left out because
Yeah.
he couldn't ride a bike and all the other kids could. And so it was important not just that he ride the bike, but from his own sense of competency,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what's interesting. If you go back to our grandparents' generation, uh, they that generation wasn't worried about what you felt like. The focus was on what you did. So you did your chores, how you treated other people, and so
Mm,
your sense of how you feel about yourself, am I good or bad, was based upon what you did.
yeah.
So if you did something and you hurt another person and you felt bad, then the message was you should feel bad because what you did was a bad thing.
Mm,
And what I'm getting to is, the message to parents is there are times when you would want your child to feel bad.
yeah. Yeah.
And it's when they did something that's harmful to themselves or someone else. You should feel bad because that's what keeps you from doing it.
Mm,
But the lie that we tell our children is that you're special and you can do, anything just because that's how we think about them versus, no, you're actually much more like all the other kids than you are different,
Yeah,
which is the
and that
truth.
and that competence is really important. That feeling of competence really drives that self-esteem more than anything else.
Yeah.
I find,
Yeah.
right,
One
is
of the things I
knowing
do
that you're
with,
capable.
yeah, one of the things I do with, I still work with some elite level athletes and being the mental coach to them. And one of the things that I ask them to integrate into their training system is to do certain exercises to failure.
Mm,
In other words, there's a difference between doing, 3 sets of 25 push-ups versus do 1 set to failure,
yeah,
or do X sets of pull-ups versus 1 set to failure. Because what happens is when you're racing and you're at a high level, you actually have to go into failure.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
want people to be comfortable in terms of seeing that coming on and know how to manage yourself when your body's now failing you.
Mm.
And most people, they don't do anything to failure. When they get really uncomfortable, Paul, they stop. And what
You
I'm
know,
saying is, don't stop because you're uncomfortable. Keep going and notice what you find out about yourself.
that's
Like,
man, I love, you know why I love that so much? I've just written a book called Death by Comfort: Why Modern Life is Killing Us and What We Need to Do About It. And in it, I have an entire chapter dedicated to harvesting discomfort. So what, from your view, right? So you've obviously come at this independently of me. What is the benefit to people for moving into discomfort and staying in that zone of discomfort?
you learn to not fear it. You learn that it doesn't harm you. Um, you learn that it transforms you in a positive way. It makes you a warrior. If you're
Mm,
going to be a warrior, you have to learn how to fight. And so we have all these children and these grown-ups now, they don't know how to fight. And what I mean by fight is they don't know how to resist that which is overtaking them. And sometimes just your own mental or physical fatigue can overtake you.
mm,
But if you learn how to resist it and push it back, so now you live in a body where your mind dictates the body
mm.
versus most people, the body dictates the mind, right? So they feel hungry, so they go eat,
Mm.
you know.
And the interesting thing about that, Stan, sorry, the interesting thing about that um, is the impact, and I've been digging into this on my PhD, is the getting into physical discomfort. Um,
Yes,
there is a significant amount of evidence that it actually enhances, not only enhances your ability to deal with physical discomfort, but there's what we call a cross transfer effect, in that it enhances your ability to deal with emotional and
right.
psychological discomfort, right? And I
Yep.
think what most people don't realize is that our stress response system is a global stress response system.
Yes.
And that by doing, and this is why I'm very passionate when I say to people about doing exercise to the point where it is pushing you and you are feeling very, very uncomfortable physically, because
Yep.
you are training your stress response system. And there's
Yep.
actually evidence that exercise actually creates a negative feedback loop in the HPA axis, right? So I actually enhances our ability to deal with stress. And I think one of the key things that highly resilient individuals have, whether they're athletes, special forces guys, or just normal people, just people who can deal with stress, is that they have this ability to push themselves into that discomfort and to sit into that discomfort. But it actually is, there's a global cross transfer effect, where you
Mm-hmm.
can then extinguish the stress response system much quicker, right? And this is
Mm-hmm.
really key.
Yeah.
It plays into research showing that anxious people and special forces soldiers are quite similar in their stress response system in that both of them switch on super, super quick with any potential threat, right? And when I first read this research, I thought, hold on a minute, surely a special forces guy would have a very high tolerance or a very high marker before their stress response system got switched on. But then I thought, well, actually, if you're in at war and you're on patrol, you want to be alert to every potential danger.
Yes.
The difference between the two groups is when the special forces guy realizes it's not a threat, boom, their stress response system switches off super quick. But anxious people, once it's stimulated, it stays
Yeah.
on for prolonged periods of time,
Right.
right? What's your commentary on that whole process?
Of being afraid of nothing. It's you're misinterpreting the situation. So from a perception standpoint, it's great that we can perceive threat and danger. But what we have now is a culture of people who perceive threat and danger when there's not.
Mm,
I'll give you one that's playing out right now for a lot of people, which is economically what's going on. And I know it's not just here in the USA, but it's throughout. Okay.
yeah.
So let's take a given individual and let's say you're retired and you've saved your money and you've got $4 million in your retirement account. Okay. So you're good for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So over the last, less than a year, your $4 million is now $3 million. So you
Mm,
have lost $1 million and you're losing your shit, right? And so people do, they freak out. And some people they get anxious and they do nothing. Other people are going to they're going to take action. Some people are going to sell and just, pull all their money out in cash, which is the worst thing to do.
mm,
Um, but how you perceive that situation, okay, so now your portfolio's dropped 25%. And let's say you're not very well informed about how the economy and how the market works, because if you were, you would know that guess what happens every 6 years? The US market loses 25% of its value.
mm.
Okay. So the guys that do really well, that survive, make money in these scenarios, when the market goes down 25%, guess what they do?
They
They
buy.
pull their wallets out and they go shopping. So think about it. So you've got two people in the exact same situation. Okay. They've both lost 25% of their money. One person is losing their shit, right?
Mm,
And really distressed and may actually make themselves physically sick by it. Another person says, this is a great opportunity, and they're kind of doubling down and going in. Now, if you're well informed, you know the history goes to the person who didn't sell and get out, but the person who dug in even deeper,
yeah.
right? So here you got two people in the exact same situation behaving very differently because of how they interpret it. The guy who's, it's the end of the world, he's freaking out and trying to gather up all his money and hide it, somewhere. And the other guy sees it as a beautiful opportunity to make even more.
Mm.
And so
And
how we perceive threat, and so what you'll see is there are people who perceive threat when there really isn't real threat, or they perceive danger when there really isn't danger.
yeah. And that perception is key. There's a brilliant research paper that I read recently that showed how you approach things psychologically, how you view them, actually dictates your cardiovascular response to it. So, what I mean by that is if you view something as a threat and a potential loss, it
Yeah,
activates the HPA axis and cortisol, which can be
yeah,
very damaging to your health. But if you view it as a challenge, it activates your
yes,
fight or flight mechanisms, which is nature's way of
yeah.
moving you forward to deal with challenges and discomfort. So I always say to people, if you're a parent or if you're a coach or if you're a leader, your language is hugely, hugely important, right? Challenge,
Right.
challenge, challenge, not threat, threat, loss, loss,
Yes.
stress, stress.
Well, Paul, I mean, what we know about us as a species, whether you believe that, we've been here 100,000 years or 300,000 years, it seems like the debate kind of goes, the Homo sapiens, but whether it's
Or,
100,000 or
or
300,
5,000 years for the creationists,
oh
right?
yeah, for the creation is 5,000. Let's don't give them too much encouragement. What we know pretty objectively historically is that we now live in the best times that Homo sapiens have ever lived.
Correct.
Okay. Our quality of life
Yeah.
is better than kings and queens 2, 3, 500 years ago. Because if you go back a couple of hundred years ago, you can be the richest person in the world, but yet your child dies because there's no
Yeah.
such thing as an antibiotic,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right? Or the doctor does bloodletting versus adding more blood, and your
Yeah.
child dies.
Yes.
So we think, so when you think you're having a rough day, to this point, if you can reflect on the fact that you were living a better quality of life than kings and queens lived just a couple of hundred years ago,
Yeah.
that might be a good way to put this in perspective, so that you don't, you know, think that what you're going through is really that tough, because everything that you're experiencing has already been experienced hundreds of thousands of times, and people have found a way through it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And
And
so you can find a way through it. There is a path forward, even when you in the moment perceive no path forward. There actually is, and if you stay with it, you'll figure it out.
mm, and
And you
and and
figure
that
it out by taking on as much challenge and difficulty and responsibility as you can tolerate. Like the antidote to your pain and suffering is do more.
that
That's the
you
cure.
you said that the last time, and I absolutely love that quote. Take on as much challenge and responsibility as you can tolerate, right? Just expand on that. So, where do we know where the line is about where you can tolerate, right? Because it's an amazing saying, but just give it a bit more depth.
So one of the things that I ask people in my work is, what are you most proud of? And something that you personally accomplished, not the birth of a child. Well, women, I allow them that, but men, you can't really say you're most proud of the birth of your child, because you had the best job, and your wife had the much more difficult job. So let's not be too proud, men, of about our role in the birth of our children.
It's
Um,
like, sorry, it's like saying your proudest moment is watching your team, your soccer team or your sports team, your American football team
yeah,
win the Super
yeah,
Bowl, right?
exactly.
You
Yeah, that's
can't claim that.
bullshit. But if you just, if you've lived long enough and you've done a few things, there's something that you've done that you're the proudest
Mm,
of. It might be graduating from university. It might be, your first triathlon or marathon, or, hiking, whatever it is. And so I ask people, what are you most proud of? And they'll tell me, and I go, was it easy or difficult? And they
mm,
go, oh, this is, 99 times out of 100. Oh, it was really difficult. Was it the most difficult thing that you've ever done? They go, yeah, it was. So think about this. So the things that we're most proud of are the things that are frequently the most difficult thing that we've done. Well, do you want to be proud of yourself? Do you want to live a life where you can hold your head up high?
mm,
Yes, you do. Well, in order to do that, you must take on challenge and difficulty.
yeah.
They go together.
Mm,
Like, Paul, most people wake up and wish that their life was easier.
yeah.
And that's
Wrong answer.
not,
Wrong question,
that's the
right?
wrong
Wrong
answer.
thinking.
You do not want your life to be easier. You want your life to be full of challenge.
Mm,
I'm not saying pain and suffering. Okay. I'm saying
yeah.
challenge and difficulty, not pain and suffering. I'm not saying that we should suffer more. I'm saying we should push ourselves more. We should, you want to walk up to the edge of yourself as frequently as you possibly can,
I love
and
that. I
stare
love.
over the edge. Okay, walk up to the edge of yourself. Don't jump off the edge, but walk up to the edge of yourself and look over and notice what is in the abyss, and stand there until you're not afraid of it, and then walk back. And then tomorrow do the same thing. And what you'll find is, over time, you're having to walk further and further to get to the edge of yourself.
Ah,
So now you're becoming bigger, you're becoming more complete, you're becoming more whole. And there's only one path to that, and that is taking on as much as you can do, doing difficult stuff. When you're training, at least one exercise where you train to failure and
Mm.
just notice what happens to you.
Yeah, that is one of the coolest things that anybody have said on this podcast, right? Walk up to the edge of yourself and stare into the abyss, right? It is
Right. But don't fall
the
over. Right.
don't
Don't kill
yeah,
yourself.
and and that's the critical thing, right? And if you've got kids, and this is whether or not this is in sport or in life, it's about stretching them or stretching yourself, um just a little bit into that zone of discomfort, right? It's not about overloading yourself with too much so that you get overwhelmed. You've got to just continue to push the envelope, right? And
Right.
if you're not living, I remember there's a mate of mine in the armed forces said, if we're not sitting right at the edge of the envelope, we're taking up too much space. And there's so many people who take up
Yeah.
far too much space, who sit in the bloody middle and never get near the edge, right?
And then if you challenge them, they get angry at you. They don't see that you're doing them a favor. See, going back to parenting or to teachers, instead of telling children, good job, Johnny, you did a good job, ask the child this question: do you feel like what you did was your best?
Nice.
And ask the child, do you think that you're doing your best? And if the child will be honest with you, they'll give you an answer like, well, I did pretty good, but maybe it's not my best. And then the response is, well, I want you to do your best
Mm.
because I want you to see what your best looks like. I want you to learn at a young age what you're capable of. And so just getting it to an acceptable level, you're not going to do that. But this is part of the self-esteem movement, is that, even if a child put forth a poor effort, we said, good job, and you got
I
a
know.
star. You're
It's
harming the
bullshit.
child when you do
Yeah,
that. You're harming
absolute.
them.
I completely and utterly agree 100%
But
on that.
also teach the child to evaluate by asking them, how do you think you did? I think I did pretty good. Do you think you did your best? Well, no. Okay, well, let's try to do our best and let's just notice what happens.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, to ask them rather than tell them how they've done, is to ask them how they think they
Yeah.
did and whether they did best. I really like it. Stan, we only have about 5 minutes left before I've got to go, unfortunately. But
Okay.
I just want to ask about, because I think that's really important, that walking up to the edge of yourself. What about somebody who has this learned helplessness, right? So, or they've been told that they're shit, they're not good enough, and that stops them from extending themselves. Whether it's either fear of failure,
Right.
or they've had discomfort before that was a bit traumatic, so they are naturally trying to protect themselves. What's your advice to these people?
I would say, unfortunately for you, someone close to you lied to you and you believe that lie. And that's just simply not true. And I'm sorry that you got lied to, and I'm sorry that you believe the lie, but that's not, I don't believe that lie. I believe that you're capable of doing much more than you've ever tried to do. And you're not going to know unless you get up off your ass and go do some things, which is really hard to do initially. You need someone to take you there.
Mm,
You need someone to take you by the hand and show you. You need a coach, you need a mentor, because the coach and mentor that you had, they failed miserably,
mm.
and they probably lived a pretty miserable life as well. All the average people, they want you to stay average with them.
Yeah.
you know people who don't have a lot of confidence, they don't want you to have a lot of confidence
That's
because it
right.
makes them uncomfortable, but they don't know consciously that they're doing that. But
Mm,
you live in a world that says just stay happy with where you're at.
mm.
you know just stay in the pack, stay in your place, follow along. um be a sheep, and don't draw too much attention to yourself, and you'll fit in nicely, and no one will put your uniform on and do what everyone else is doing.
And man, what about, so the other end of it? People who have perfectionism, sometimes bordering on clinical. I don't know if you get into
Oh yeah,
clinical
yeah,
perfectionism, that's really difficult. But people who have this perfectionism that can often stop them from starting.
yeah. Well,
What's a
that's a
bit of
lie
advice to
too.
them?
That's a lie too. You know, the concept of perfect, it gets introduced into our culture, because we're essentially a puritanical and then Christian or even Protestant culture. In the Bible, there's the teaching of be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect.
Mm,
If I was a Bible scholar, I could tell you the verse, but what
where it
I
came
know
from.
is that was interpreted from the Greek, and the Greek word is teleos, and we translate the word teleos into perfect. William Tyndale, who in 1500s translated the Bible into English for the first time. But the word that he translated into perfect was the word teleos, which means to be whole or complete. So actually what
Mm,
the scripture was saying is be a whole, complete person, not a perfect person, not without error, just whole and complete. Be all of you, not a perfect version of you, be a complete version of yourself. So if you're being yourself fully, then what you're going to do is you're going to challenge yourself and you're going to do things that you can't do yet, which means you're going to fail.
mm,
But then you I mean, if you look at experts, this is what you see, right? They try the first time, they fail, they try again, they fail, they try again and fail, and then they finally do it right, and then they get it, and then they master it, and then they go to the next thing. And what happens? Well, they fail, and then they fail again, but they understand that I have to fail like 6 or 8 times, right? And they more closely get it, and that's how they go through their life. So they interpret their failure as just, I'm on the way, like
a
that's
step
the
closer.
path, right?
Mm,
It's like, when a child is learning to walk, the child just doesn't jump up and start walking.
mm.
It takes a step and falls, it takes a step, and it does this over and over and over and over and over again, and then you take 2 steps and fall. But we don't see that as failure. If
Mm.
your toddler is standing up, of course, as a parent, you're losing your mind cheering them, and then when you take their first step, oh my gosh, we're losing our mind about that. But when the child takes their first step and then falls, we don't see that as failure. We understand that's how you learn to walk.
Yeah,
Well, it's
absolutely.
true in everything,
Mm. And
right?
and and I guess with those perfectionists, they're actually not even taking any steps up to the edge of themselves because they think those steps have to be perfect.
Yeah, like the kid that I was telling you about that I taught to ride the bike. I said, now you're going to fall down a couple of times. You're not going to get hurt bad, but you might scrape your elbow up. And I said, would you trade a scraped elbow for being able to ride the bike? Yeah. I said, there you go. If you're willing to
Mm.
trade a scraped elbow, right, to ride the bike, then you're going to ride the bike. But you're not going to ride the bike without giving something, right? There's a cost to it.
Mm. Absolutely. And
For me, there's this scar here that you can't see anymore, but that was my ticket. That was the price I paid to learn to ride a bike, was you know
absolutely. Stan, unfortunately, we have to end this because I have to rush off into the city to do a workshop today. But mate, there have been so many little nuggets of gold as per the
this is
last
fun.
time.
Yeah.
This is definitely not the last time I'm going to get you on because you are just a modern day philosopher. I love the shit that comes out of your mouth, and
Well, I sit around and think.
I don't say that about very many Americans, Stan.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'll take that as a compliment.
Awesome. I will catch you next time, Stan.
Thank you.
Mate, that was brilliant.
All
Absolutely
right.
brilliant.
Good.
We
All
definitely
right.
need to do this again.
All right. Let me know.
All right, cool. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You too, Paul. Bye bye.